Morgan Alexander stared at the aircraft from the terminal window, watching as the same flight attendant who had humiliated her now frantically waved for her return. The entire airport fell silent as Morgan's voice echoed through the PA system. "This is your CEO speaking. Flight 2187 is officially grounded. Before I dive into this shocking story of discrimination and redemption, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed injustice, and subscribe to hear more stories of people standing up for themselves. Now, let's rewind to understand how a powerful black CEO ended up being kicked off her own airline. Morgan Alexander never imagined she would one day run an airline. Growing up in the small town of Macon, Georgia, her earliest memories were of watching planes take off from the regional airport, where her father worked as a janitor for 30 years. Every evening, Morgan would wait for him at the employee entrance, her small brown fingers pressed against the chain-link fence as she counted the planes ascending into the Georgia sky. "Daddy, you think I could fly one of those someday?" she asked once when she was 8. James Alexander had smiled down at his daughter, his weathered face creasing with both love and concern. "Baby girl, you can do anything you set your mind to, but this world, it might not always make it easy." Those words became Morgan's guiding light through a childhood marked by excellence. Despite limited opportunities, her father's modest salary barely covered their needs. But Morgan's academic brilliance opened doors. She graduated valedictorian from her high school and earned a full scholarship to Spelman College. Even then, the aviation industry called to her. While her classmates pursued careers in medicine and law, Morgan focused on business with a single-minded determination to transform air travel. Her senior thesis on improving airline efficiency caught the attention of Harvard Business School, which offered her admission with partial financial aid. Harvard proved to be Morgan's first real taste of the discrimination that would follow her throughout her career. As one of only 7 black women in her MBA class of 300, she faced constant questioning of her abilities and credentials. "I remember sitting in my first finance class," Morgan would later tell business students during commencement speeches. "The professor asked a question about market valuation. I raised my hand and gave the correct answer, but he moved on as if I hadn't spoken. 2 minutes later, a white male student gave the exact same answer and received praise for his insight." These microaggressions became so routine that Morgan developed a strategy. Be twice as prepared, speak 3 times as clearly, and never show frustration. She graduated in the top 5% of her class, despite having to work part-time to supplement her scholarship. Her first job after graduation was with Legacy Airlines, where she quickly rose from analyst to director of operations in just 4 years. But the glass ceiling became apparent when she was passed over for vice president in favor of a less qualified white male colleague. "They told me I wasn't ready," Morgan confided to her mentor, an older black woman who had hit similar barriers. "When I asked what specific qualifications I lacked, they couldn't name a single one." Rather than fight a battle she knew she couldn't win through traditional channels, Morgan made a bold move that shocked the industry. At 27, she mortgaged everything she owned, convinced 5 angel investors to back her, and purchased a failing regional commuter airline called AirConnect that was on the verge of bankruptcy. The industry pundits laughed. Aviation trade magazines predicted she would fail within 6 months. One particularly vicious article described her as a diversity hire promoting herself to CEO. But Morgan had a vision and the skills to execute it. She rebranded the airline as NextGen, introduced a revolutionary pricing model that eliminated hidden fees, and focused on routes that larger airlines had abandoned, connecting underserved communities across America. Within 3 years, NextGen was profitable. By year 5, it had expanded to major routes. After a decade, it had grown to become the 5th largest airline in the United States, with a reputation for excellent service and innovative business practices. Throughout this meteoric rise, Morgan maintained her commitment to diversity. NextGen boasted the highest percentage of minority pilots in the industry. The executive team reflected America's diversity, with people of color making up 60% of leadership positions. These policies drew criticism from industry traditionalists, who claimed she was prioritizing identity over qualifications. I hire the best people for the job, Morgan would respond in interviews. It just so happens that when you remove the barriers of bias, you discover talent in places the industry has traditionally ignored. The success came at a personal cost. Her marriage to her college sweetheart ended after 7 years. The casualty of 100-hour workweeks and constant travel. At 42, she had postponed having children until it was too late, a regret she occasionally acknowledged in her rare personal interviews. "The airline became my baby," she once told a women's business magazine. "Every decision I made was about ensuring its growth and health. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like with a family. But NextGen has given me a different kind of legacy." As NextGen grew, Morgan became increasingly removed from the day-to-day customer experience. Executive meetings, investor calls, and strategic planning filled her calendar. She worried that she was losing touch with what had made her airline special. In the first place, the human connection. This concern led her to implement an undercover boss program that even her executive team didn't know about. Once every quarter, Morgan would fly on a NextGen flight without revealing her identity, experiencing her airline as customers did. "It keeps me honest," she told her assistant. "The only person privy to these trips, I need to know if we're living up to our promises." It was during one of these undercover journeys that Morgan boarded Flight 187 from Atlanta to Chicago, unaware that this routine flight would become a pivotal moment not just for her career, but for the entire airline industry. The Atlanta International Airport hummed with activity on that fateful Tuesday morning. Morgan had deliberately dressed down for her undercover flight, worn jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, minimal makeup, and a colorful headscarf that concealed her signature braids. Gone were the tailored suits and distinctive jewelry that marked her appearances in business magazines. Today, she was just another passenger. She waited patiently in the Group 3 boarding line, observing how the gate agents interacted with customers. So far, everything seemed normal. The usual mix of harried business travelers, families with children, and solo adventurers all shuffling forward with their carry-ons and personal items. When Morgan reached the front of the line, she presented her boarding pass to the gate agent with a polite smile. "Good morning." The gate agent, a young white man with a name tag reading Tyler, scanned her pass and nodded. "Have a good flight." "Ma'am." Morgan made her way down the jetway, noting the clean walkway and clear signage, small details she insisted on. For all NextGen facilities. As she approached the aircraft door, she was greeted by flight attendant Vanessa Whitley. Vanessa was 38, blonde, with the polished appearance of someone who had spent years in customer service. Her smile, however, noticeably dimmed. As her eyes swept over Morgan, "Boarding pass?" Vanessa asked. Her tone suddenly clipped. Morgan handed over her pass, which clearly showed her seat assignment, 1 for a window seat in economy. Vanessa studied the pass with exaggerated scrutiny, turning it over and examining it as if searching for signs of forgery. "Are you sure you're on this flight?" she asked loudly, drawing the attention of passengers already seated near the entrance. "Yes, I'm sure," Morgan replied calmly. "Seat 1 for A to Chicago." Vanessa's eyebrows arched. "This is first-class boarding now. Economy boards later." "I understand that," Morgan explained patiently. "But the gate agent just scanned my pass and cleared me to board." Vanessa's expression hardened. Well, there must have been a mistake. She turned toward another flight attendant who was helping a passenger stow luggage. "Bradley, can you come check this, please?" Bradley Cooper, a tall black man in his mid-30s, approached with a professional smile that faltered slightly when he saw the situation. His eyes darted between Vanessa and Morgan, and a flash of recognition crossed his face. Not of Morgan as the CEO, but recognition of the situation itself. "What's the issue?" he asked neutrally. "This woman claims she was cleared to board, but this is first-class boarding," Vanessa stated loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Can you verify her boarding pass?" Bradley took the pass and glanced at it briefly. "Her pass is valid, Vanessa. Seat 1 for A. Gate must have cleared her early. That doesn't make sense." Vanessa insisted. "Check it again." By now, several passengers had turned to watch the unfolding scene. Morgan remained composed, though she felt the familiar burn of humiliation that she thought she'd left behind years ago. Discreetly, she took out her phone and began recording the interaction, a habit she'd developed after countless similar encounters throughout her life. As the CEO of an airline, she knew there was no policy against passengers recording their own experiences. Bradley handed the boarding pass back to Morgan. "Everything looks in order. You can proceed to your seat, ma'am." Morgan nodded thankfully to Bradley and took a step forward, but Vanessa moved to block her path. "Excuse me, but you can't record me," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "That's against airline policy." Morgan kept her tone even. "Actually, it's not. Next-gen policy allows passengers to record their own experiences as long as they don't interfere with crew operations." Vanessa's face flushed. "How would you know our policies better than I do? I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording immediately, or you won't be allowed to fly today." A white businessman in his 50s, who had been observing the situation from a few feet away, spoke up. "I've been recording this entire boarding process for my travel vlog. You didn't say anything to me about it." Vanessa ignored him completely, her attention fixed solely on Morgan. "Security." She called out to an airport security officer who was walking past the gate. "We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew member instructions." The security officer, a stocky man with Davis on his badge, approached with a hand resting on his belt. "What seems to be the problem?" "This passenger is recording crew members after being asked to stop, and she's being disruptive during the boarding process," Vanessa stated firmly. "I've broken no rules," Morgan said calmly to the officer. "My boarding pass was verified twice, and there is no policy against passengers recording their own experiences." Officer Davis looked uncertain, glancing between Morgan and Vanessa. "As a crew member, I have the authority to remove any passenger I deem disruptive for flight safety," Vanessa declared, crossing her arms. "And I'm exercising that authority now." Bradley stepped forward. "Vanessa, I don't think this rises to that level. Are you questioning my judgment, Bradley?" Vanessa snapped. "You know the regulations. The captain backs the crew's safety decisions." Bradley fell silent, his discomfort evident, but his resistance quelled. Morgan could have revealed her identity then. One sentence would have transformed the entire situation, but a deeper purpose kept her silent. This was exactly why she flew undercover. If this was happening to her, what were other passengers of color experiencing? "Officer Davis, please escort this passenger back to the terminal," Vanessa instructed. She can rebook on another flight after she learns to comply with crew instructions. Despite Morgan's calm protests and the businessman's attempt to intervene, Officer Davis took her by the elbow and led her back up the jetway. As they walked, Morgan continued recording, documenting every moment of her removal from her own airline. Just before they reached the terminal, Officer Davis spoke quietly. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I don't see what you did wrong, but we have to back up the flight crew's authority." Morgan nodded, her mind already racing with what would happen next. "I understand. You're doing your job." As they emerged into the terminal, Morgan Alexander, the woman who had built an airline empire from nothing, who had overcome every barrier placed before her, found herself standing alone at the gate, watching through the large windows as Flight 2187 prepared for departure without her. But unlike the countless other passengers of color who had faced similar discrimination with no recourse, Morgan held more than just a phone recording in her hands. She held the power to ground that entire plane. What would you do if you were in Morgan's position? Would you immediately reveal your identity, or would you use this opportunity to expose systemic problems? Comment below with your thoughts. And if you've ever experienced discrimination while traveling, hit that like button. Now, let's see what Morgan does next. Have you ever had that pivotal moment when everything suddenly becomes crystal clear? When all the puzzle pieces of injustice finally form a complete picture? That's exactly what happened to Morgan Alexander as she stood in the terminal, watching her own airplane through the massive windows. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a potent mixture of anger and revelation. This wasn't just about one flight attendant or one incident. What she had just experienced was the manifestation of a problem lurking within the very company she had built. Morgan found a quiet corner of the terminal and pulled out her phone. With fingers that had signed billion-dollar contracts and reshaped an industry, she dialed a number few people had access to. "Tiana, it's Morgan. I need you at gate C42 immediately. Bring James from legal." "No, I'm fine." But NextGen isn't. Tiana Washington had been Morgan's executive vice president for 7 years, a brilliant black woman with a law degree from Yale. Tiana had faced her own battles in the corporate world. She understood without explanation that her CEO's call from an airport gate was a 5-alarm fire. As Morgan waited, she couldn't help but reflect on how familiar this humiliation felt, even in a designer headscarf instead of the drugstore one she'd worn in college. Even with a net worth approaching 9 figures, she was still just another black woman who could be removed from a flight on a white woman's whim. The memories flooded back with surprising clarity. The Harvard professor who had suggested she might be more comfortable at a historically black college, the bank loan officer who insisted on speaking to her husband or father when she sought her first business loan, the potential investor who asked if she was the help when she arrived for a pitch meeting. Morgan had believed that by creating her own company with her own culture, she could build something different. Looking at her airline now from the wrong side of the gate, she realized how naive that belief had been. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email. Her executive assistant had immediately pulled the passenger manifest for flight to 187. When Morgan missed her check-in call, Morgan scanned the crew list and stopped at Vanessa Whitley's name. Something clicked in her memory. With a few quick taps, she accessed the company's HR database. What she found sent ice through her veins. 6 previous complaints against Vanessa Whitley for discriminatory behavior. 6, all filed by passengers of color, all dismissed by middle management as misunderstandings or passenger confusion. About policies, Morgan expanded her search. Similar patterns emerged across multiple crew members and stations. A systematic burying of discrimination complaints. The very diversity initiatives she had championed were being undermined by managers who dismissed valid concerns and protected problematic employees. Morgan. She looked up to see Tiana Washington striding across the terminal, her tailored navy suit and confident gait turning heads. Behind her came James Rodriguez, NextGen's longtime legal counsel, carrying his ever-present leather portfolio. "What happened?" Tiana asked, her eyes quickly assessing Morgan's casual clothing and the absence of her usual security detail. Morgan held up her phone, playing the video of her confrontation with Vanessa. With each passing second, Tiana's expression hardened and James began taking rapid notes. "I was flying undercover," Morgan explained. "Just a routine check on customer experience. And this is what happened. This is grounds for immediate termination," Tiana stated flatly when the video ended. "Clear violation of our anti-discrimination policies." James nodded in agreement. "Textbook discriminatory enforcement of policies. The selective application against you while ignoring the white male passenger doing the same thing is particularly damning." "It's worse," Morgan said, showing them the HR records she'd accessed. "Look at this pattern. 6 previous complaints buried. And she's not the only one." Tiana's sharp intake of breath conveyed her shock. "How did we miss this?" "Because we trusted our middle management to uphold our values," Morgan replied, "and they failed." As they discussed next steps, a tall man in a ground crew uniform approached hesitantly. "Ms. Alexander, is that you?" Morgan turned to see Michael Winters, a 55-year-old ground operations supervisor who had been with her since the AirConnect days. "Michael," she acknowledged with a small smile. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, glancing at her casual attire. "Is everything all right? Why aren't you on your flight?" Before Morgan could answer, the terminal security office door opened and Officer Davis emerged with his supervisor. The security footage had already been reviewed, and the supervisor's expression made it clear who they believed was in the wrong. "Ms. Alexander," the security supervisor said, "on behalf of airport security, I want to apologize for the incident that just occurred. We've reviewed the footage. and there was clearly no justification for removing you from that flight. A small crowd had begun to gather. Airport employees recognizing the CEO of one of the largest airlines in America, standing in ordinary clothes at a gate. "What do you want to do?" Tiana asked quietly. "James and I recommend immediate termination of Vanessa Whitley. We can have HR waiting when the plane lands in Chicago." Morgan considered this option for only a moment before shaking her head. "No, firing one flight attendant won't solve the systemic problem. If we handle this privately, nothing changes." She turned to look out the window at Flight 2187, still at the gate due to a minor mechanical delay. "I have a different idea," Morgan said, her voice taking on the decisive tone that had made her famous in corporate boardrooms. "One that will make it impossible for anyone at NextGen to ignore discrimination ever again." Do you think Morgan is making the right choice by not simply firing Vanessa? Comment number 1 if you believe systemic problems require systemic solutions. Or number 2 if you think she should just terminate the flight attendant and move on. Like and subscribe if you're ready to see how Morgan transforms this humiliating moment into a powerful stance against discrimination. How exactly will she use her power as CEO to address this injustice? Let's find out. Morgan Alexander stepped into the first-class lounge at Atlanta International Airport with purpose in her stride. The lounge attendant did a double take at her casual clothes before recognizing the CEO. "Ms. Alexander, we weren't expecting you today. Karen, I need the private room and my emergency travel bag from storage, please." Within minutes, Morgan was changing from her undercover outfit into what her staff called her power armor. A perfectly tailored black suit with subtle red pinstripes, crisp white blouse, and the signature gold NextGen wings pin on her lapel. As she twisted her hair into its usual impeccable bun, Morgan studied her reflection. The transformation was remarkable, from invisible to unmistakable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tiana. "Flight 2187 still at gate. Minor hydraulic issue being addressed. Captain estimates 20-minute delay." Morgan smiled grimly. Perfect timing. She dialed the number for Harold Fishman, the 70-year-old chairman of NextGen's board of directors and one of her earliest investors. "Morgan, unusual to hear from you midweek," Harold answered. "Harold, I'm invoking Emergency Protocol Alpha." There was a pause. Emergency Protocol Alpha gave the CEO unilateral decision-making power in crisis situations, bypassing normal board approval processes. It had been used only twice in the company's history, once during a major hurricane and once during a pilot strike. "What's happened?" Harold asked, his voice now serious. "Crash security threat. Discrimination at the highest level," Morgan replied. "I'm sending you a video now. I was just removed from one of our flights because of racial profiling by a flight attendant. But everyone at NextGen knows who you are." "I was flying undercover, Harold. That's not the point. The point is that I've discovered a pattern of ignored discrimination complaints. This isn't an isolated incident." As Harold watched the video, Morgan laid out her plan. By the time she finished, the board chairman was uncharacteristically quiet. "That's going to cause an uproar," he finally said. "The stock will take a hit, and then it will recover," Morgan countered. "Because we'll be the airline that faced its problems honestly. This isn't just the right thing to do morally, Harold. Long term, it's the right business decision." After a moment, Harold sighed. "That's why you're the CEO. Do what you need to do. I'll handle the board." With Harold's support secured, Morgan called James Rodriguez to ensure every action would be legally sound. "We're walking a fine line," James cautioned. "But as long as we follow our own published policies to the letter, we're on solid ground." Tiana had already mobilized an emergency response team. HR representatives were standing by, and the company's social media team was prepared for the inevitable online reaction. Morgan took a deep breath and made one final call to Devin Williams, the captain of Flight 2187. "Captain Williams, this is CEO Morgan Alexander." "Ms. Alexander," Devin responded, surprise evident in his voice. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to delay your departure. Tell the passengers there's a minor issue being resolved." Under no circumstances are you to leave the gate until you receive direct instructions from me. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Devon replied. "May I ask what's happening?" "You'll know very soon. This comes directly from me under Emergency Protocol Alpha." As Morgan hung up, she turned to Tiana and James. "Let's go." The three executives walked purposefully through the terminal, accompanied now by two airport security officers and Michael Winters from ground operations. Passengers and airport staff stared as they passed, sensing the gravity in their expressions. At gate C42, Morgan stopped and addressed the gate agent. "Tyler, I need you to hold that door open. Flight to 187 is not departing until further notice." The young man's eyes widened as he recognized her. "Yes, Ms. Alexander, right away." Inside the aircraft, confusion was growing. The passengers of Flight to 187 had been sitting on the tarmac for nearly 30 minutes. With no departure in sight, the minor mechanical issue explanation was wearing thin. Vanessa Whitley moved through the cabin with increasing anxiety, facing questions she couldn't answer. "I apologize for the delay," she repeated to an irritated businessman. "The captain assures me we'll be departing shortly." In the cockpit, Captain Devon Williams was equally perplexed. The maintenance issue had been resolved 15 minutes ago, but his orders from corporate were explicit. The plane was not to leave the gate. His co-pilot checked the weather radar again, finding nothing that would explain the hold. The cabin door, which had been closed for boarding completion, suddenly reopened. Vanessa turned in surprise to see two airport security officers enter the aircraft, followed by Tiana Washington, whom she recognized from company newsletters. "Ms. Washington," Vanessa said, confusion evident in her voice. "What's happening?" Tiana didn't answer directly. "Captain Williams, please come to the cabin." The cockpit door opened and Devon emerged, his expression concerned. Behind Tiana came three people in NextGen HR uniforms and James Rodriguez from legal, all wearing grave expressions. The passengers fell silent, sensing something unprecedented was occurring. And then Morgan Alexander stepped onto the aircraft. The transformation from the casually dressed woman Vanessa had removed 30 minutes earlier to the commanding CEO in her power suit was so complete that for a moment, Vanessa didn't make the connection. When recognition dawned, the color drained from her face. "Ms. Whitley," Morgan said, her voice carrying throughout the suddenly silent cabin. "I believe we have some unfinished business." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed without sound. Bradley Cooper, standing at the back of the plane, took an involuntary step forward, his eyes wide with shock. Morgan took the cabin phone used for announcements and pressed the button for the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Morgan Alexander, Chief Executive Officer of NextGen Airlines. I apologize for the delay in your departure today, but we are addressing a serious situation that requires immediate attention." She paused, her eyes meeting Vanessa's. 30 minutes ago, I was removed from this flight while attempting to board as a passenger. I was flying undercover, as I occasionally do, to experience our airline, as our customers do. What I experienced was discrimination, plain and simple. A murmur ran through the cabin as passengers processed her words. NextGen Airlines was founded on principles of equality, respect, and dignity for all. Today, those principles were violated. But this isn't about me. My concern is for every passenger who has ever experienced similar treatment, without having the power to do anything about it. Morgan's voice remained steady, but her eyes burned with intensity. "Ms. Whitley, your actions today violated our most fundamental company policies. Our investigation has revealed that this is not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of behavior that has somehow been allowed to continue." Despite multiple complaints, Vanessa found her voice at last. "Ms. Alexander, I was just following protocol. You were recording crew members after being asked to stop while ignoring the white male passenger doing the exact same thing." Morgan cut in. "The selective enforcement of policies based on race is the definition of discrimination." "Ms. Whitley." Several passengers nodded in agreement. One woman near the front called out, "I saw the whole thing. She's right." Morgan continued addressing the entire cabin. "Effective immediately, NextGen Airlines is implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, not just in our employee handbook, but in practice, with real consequences. She turned to Tiana. Ms. Washington, please proceed. With the HR action we discussed, Tiana stepped forward with an HR representative, Vanessa Whitley. Pending a full investigation, you are being placed on immediate administrative leave. You will deplane now and report to HR headquarters tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The HR representative handed Vanessa an envelope containing the official notice. For a moment, it seemed Vanessa might protest, but faced with the unwavering gazes of Morgan and Tiana, she accepted the envelope with trembling hands. "This isn't fair," she said quietly. "I was just doing my job." "Your job," Morgan replied evenly, "was to treat all passengers with equal respect and dignity. A review of complaints against you shows a clear pattern of failing to do that." Bradley Cooper stepped forward. "Ms. Alexander, if I may," he hesitated, then continued with resolution. "I've witnessed Ms. Whitley treat passengers of color differently on multiple occasions. I regret not reporting it earlier." From further down the aisle, another flight attendant spoke up. A young Indian-American woman named Jasmine Patel. "I've seen it too, on the Chicago-Atlanta route last month. She made a black family with a valid first-class ticket move to economy. Claiming their tickets were invalid," Morgan nodded. "Taking in this information, thank you both for your honesty. This is exactly why systemic problems persist, when witnesses stay silent out of fear or complacency." She turned back to address the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize to each of you for this delay. As compensation, NextGen will be providing full refunds for this flight, plus vouchers for future travel. My team will ensure you reach your destination as quickly as possible, with a new crew that is already being assembled." A mixture of reactions spread through the cabin. Some passengers applauded Morgan's decisive action, while others grumbled about the additional delay to their travel plans. "I understand your frustration," Morgan acknowledged, "but I believe most of you would agree that ensuring dignity and respect for all passengers is worth a few hours of inconvenience." As security escorted Vanessa Whitley off the aircraft, Morgan made one final announcement. "Today marks a turning point for NextGen Airlines. I promise you that what happened here will lead to real, lasting change throughout our company. Thank you for your patience and understanding." With that, Morgan nodded to Tiana and James, and they began to exit the aircraft to allow the new crew to board and prepare for departure. As they walked up the jetway, Tiana leaned close to Morgan. "That was bold. The press will be all over this by the time we reach the terminal." Morgan nodded. "I'm counting on it. Sometimes the only way to change a system is to expose its failings so publicly that no one can ignore them anymore." And as they emerged into the terminal, Morgan's phone was already buzzing with notifications. Videos taken by passengers were uploading to social media platforms. The story of the black CEO who grounded her own flight to confront racism was about to go viral. As the new flight crew prepared Flight 2187 for departure, Morgan re-entered the cabin for one final address to the passengers. The atmosphere had shifted from confusion to anticipation. Everyone on board now realized they were part of a significant moment. Morgan took the PA system again, her voice firm but compassionate. "Before you depart, I want to speak to you not just as the CEO of NextGen, but as a human being who has experienced what too many Americans face daily. What happened to me today, being singled out, humiliated, and removed from this flight, was not an isolated incident." She paused, making eye contact with several passengers. NextGen Airlines was founded with a mission to treat every passenger with dignity and respect. Somewhere along the way, despite our stated values and policies, we've allowed a culture to develop where discrimination can go unchecked. That ends today. Morgan outlined the immediate changes being implemented: an independent review of all past discrimination complaints, mandatory anti-bias training for all 23,000 NextGen employees, and a new passenger advocacy office reporting directly to her. "But policies alone don't change culture," she continued. "That requires honest conversation and accountability at every level, which is why I'm asking something of each of you. The cabin was utterly silent now, every passenger focused on her. Words, if you witnessed what happened during boarding today, or if you've experienced or observed discrimination on any next-gen flight, I invite you to share your story. My team will be in the terminal when you land in Chicago, ready to listen and document your experiences. A middle-aged black woman in row 12 raised her hand. When Morgan acknowledged her, she stood up. Ms. Alexander, I fly NextGen twice monthly. For business. What happened to you has happened to me 3 times in the past year. I've filed complaints each time, but nothing ever changed. I'm deeply sorry, Morgan responded. Your complaints will be part of our review, and I promise you'll see real change going forward. A young Latino man in row 20 spoke next. I have videos of 2 incidents where I was treated differently than white passengers. I never bothered reporting because I didn't think anyone would care. Morgan nodded solemnly. We care, I care, and we want to see those videos. As more passengers began to share their experiences, a pattern emerged that confirmed Morgan's worst fears. Discrimination wasn't just happening. It was pervasive enough that passengers had come to expect and accept it as part of their travel. Bradley Cooper, still visibly shaken by the events, approached Morgan. Ms. Alexander, I need to say something. Given permission to speak, Bradley addressed the cabin. As a black flight attendant, I've witnessed the differential treatment Ms. Whitley and others have shown to passengers of color. I regret not speaking up sooner. I was afraid for my job, afraid of being labeled a troublemaker. That fear allowed this behavior to continue, and I apologize for my part in that. His honest admission created a powerful moment. Morgan thanked him for his courage, then made a decision. Mr. Cooper, I'd like you to join our new passenger advocacy team. We need people who recognize these issues and are committed to addressing them. As Bradley nodded in grateful acceptance, another flight attendant stepped forward. Jasmine Patel, who had spoken up earlier about witnessing discrimination. There's a group of us, she said quietly to Morgan. Flight attendants who've documented these incidents, but didn't know who to trust with the information. We have evidence of systematic burial of complaints by certain managers. Morgan exchanged glances with Tiana. This was bigger than they had initially realized. Ms. Patel, I want you working with us too. We need to identify every part of our organization where these problems exist. From the back of the plane, Vanessa's voice suddenly rang out. She had returned from the jetway, pushing past a surprised HR representative. This is ridiculous, she exclaimed. You're taking the word of passengers over your own trained staff. I followed procedures. Morgan turned to face her directly. Ms. Whitley, the evidence speaks for itself. You selectively enforced a policy based on race. That's discrimination, plain and simple. You were being disruptive. Vanessa insisted, her voice rising. I was ensuring flight safety by ignoring the white male passenger doing the exact same thing. Morgan countered. The security footage clearly shows differential treatment. Several passengers pulled out their phones, revealing that they had recorded the boarding incident. From multiple angles, one by one, they offered their footage to support Morgan's account. Vanessa's face flushed as the reality of her situation became clear. With multiple witnesses and recordings, her actions were indefensible. Security will escort you from this aircraft now, Ms. Whitley, Morgan said firmly. Your future with NextGen will be determined following a complete investigation. As Vanessa was led away, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed again. What had begun as a routine flight had become a watershed moment. Passengers who had been strangers an hour ago were now sharing their experiences, comparing notes, and expressing solidarity. Morgan made a final announcement before leaving the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience today. What happened on this flight will become a case study in how NextGen addresses discrimination. This isn't just about one employee or one incident. It's about changing an industry that has to often turn a blind eye to these issues, she continued. In addition to your full refunds and travel vouchers, each of you will receive my personal contact information. I want to hear your suggestions for how we can do better, because this moment isn't the end of something, it's the beginning of a transformation. As Morgan exited the aircraft, passengers actually applauded, not the polite, obligatory applause of a completed flight, but the genuine recognition of someone taking a principled stand. In the terminal, the story was already spreading. Airport staff and passengers from other gates had gathered, many recording on their phones as Morgan Alexander, in her distinctive power suit, emerged from the jetway followed by her executive team. "Is it true you grounded a flight because of racism?" a bystander called out. Morgan paused, aware that her response would likely be recorded and shared. "I grounded a flight because NextGen Airlines will not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Today we had to live up to our own values, even when it was inconvenient and costly." As Flight 2187 finally departed, nearly 2 hours behind schedule, but with a new crew and a cabin full of passengers who had witnessed corporate accountability in action, Morgan knew the real work was just beginning. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Videos were being uploaded to social media platforms. News organizations were calling for statements. The NextGen press office was already fielding dozens of media inquiries. By the time Morgan reached her office at NextGen headquarters, the story had gone national. #CEO grounding racism was trending, and the first news helicopters were circling the building. The public reckoning had begun, and Morgan Alexander was ready for it. Have you ever witnessed something extraordinary unfold in real time, spreading like wildfire across the digital landscape? That's exactly what happened in the hours following Morgan Alexander's confrontation on Flight 2187. By the time the plane touched down in Chicago, over 30 separate videos of the incident had been uploaded to social media platforms. Passengers live tweeted the entire event, sharing Morgan's powerful speech and the revelations that followed. Within an hour, #CEO grounding racism was the #1 trending topic nationwide. Morning shows scrambled to book interviews with passengers. News helicopters hovered above NextGen headquarters. The company's customer service lines were flooded with calls, some expressing support, others demanding to know if their upcoming flights would be affected by the turmoil. In the executive conference room at NextGen headquarters, Morgan sat with her crisis management team, watching the story unfold on multiple screens. "Stock is down 12%, reported the CFO, his face grim. "Investors are panicking. They'll recover," Morgan replied calmly, "when they see we're serious about fixing the problem rather than just applying a PR band-aid." The company's social media director looked up from her laptop. "We've got competing airlines releasing statements condemning discrimination and highlighting their own diversity initiatives. They're trying to capitalize on our situation." Morgan nodded. "Let them. This isn't about competitive advantage. It's about doing what's right." The screens showed clips from cable news networks, each putting their own spin on the story. Conservative commentators questioned Morgan's motives, suggesting the entire incident was a publicity stunt. Liberal networks praised her courage while highlighting the broader issues of discrimination in the travel industry. "The narrative is splitting along predictable lines," Tiana observed, "but the passenger videos speak for themselves. They're undeniable." As if on cue, James entered the room with a tablet. "You need to see this. Former employees are coming forward." He placed the tablet in front of Morgan. On the screen was a live interview with a former NextGen flight attendant, a young black woman who had left the company 2 years earlier. "I filed 3 separate complaints about discriminatory treatment of passengers," she was saying. "Each time, I was told the matter would be investigated. Each time, nothing happened. Eventually, I found my shifts reduced until I couldn't afford to stay. That's how the system works. It doesn't just protect those who discriminate, it punishes those who speak up." Morgan watched the interview, her expression hardening. "Find her, offer her job back with back pay if she wants it, and find every other employee who left under similar circumstances." The news cycle continued to accelerate. By afternoon, major business publications were analyzing the potential financial impact on NextGen. Aviation industry experts debated whether Morgan's actions were appropriate or an overreaction. Social media users shared their own stories of discrimination during air travel, creating a massive virtual conversation. Morgan Alexander had become the most searched name on the internet. Her biography was being scrutinized, her previous statements on diversity examined, her personal life dissected. Old interviews resurfaced, including one where she had discussed the challenges of being a black woman in the aviation industry. The interesting thing, she had said 3 years earlier, is that people assume once you reach a certain level of success, discrimination disappears. It doesn't. It just takes different forms. Those words now seemed prophetic. By evening, the first attack ads appeared. A shadowy industry group launched a campaign questioning whether social justice agendas should take precedence over airline safety and efficiency. Without naming NextGen directly, the message was clear. Morgan's actions were being painted as dangerous and irresponsible. On right-wing media, commentators suggested the entire incident had been orchestrated for publicity. Are we really supposed to believe that the CEO of a major airline just happened to be on this flight incognito? One pundit asked skeptically. This smells like a calculated PR move to position NextGen as the woke choice for travelers. The personal attacks grew more vicious as the day progressed. Morgan's social media accounts were flooded with both support and horrific racial slurs. Security at her home had to be increased after several credible threats were identified. You should consider staying at a hotel tonight, her head of security advised during a brief call. Morgan declined. I won't be driven from my home by hate. Increase security if necessary, but I'm staying put. As midnight approached, Morgan finally returned to her penthouse apartment. Exhausted but resolute, the day's events played on a continuous loop on every news channel. Her phone contained over 300 unread messages and thousands of notifications. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. Her reflection stared back at her, still in the power suit she had put on that morning. Though her perfect bun had begun to unravel, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Harold Fishman, the board chairman. Harold, she answered. I assume you're calling about the emergency board meeting tomorrow. How did you know about that? He asked, surprise evident in his voice. Because it's what I would do in your position, Morgan replied. The stock is down. The media is in a feeding frenzy, and major shareholders are probably calling you non-stop. There was a pause before Harold sighed. Some board members are suggesting you step back temporarily until this blows over. They're concerned about the financial impact. And what do you think? Harold, I think you did exactly what our company values say we should do. But I also think tomorrow's meeting will be the fight of your career. After they hung up, Morgan sat in the darkness of her apartment, the city lights creating patterns on her walls. The board meeting tomorrow would indeed be challenging. Some would see her actions as noble but financially reckless. Others would question whether she had overreacted to what they might minimize as a misunderstanding. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tiana. Just received internal data from HR. Over 200 discrimination complaints in the past year alone. 92% were dismissed without action. 89% were filed by passengers of color. We have a systemic problem. Morgan stared at the message. The numbers confirmed what she had suspected. The incident with Vanessa Whitley wasn't an anomaly, but a symptom of a much deeper problem. She texted back, prepare a full presentation for the board tomorrow. They need to see the scope of this. As she finally prepared for bed, Morgan checked the trending topics one last time. Hashtag #SeoGroundandGrassism had been joined by hashtag #StandWithMorgan. And from her critics, hashtag #GroundMorgan instead. Tomorrow would indeed be the fight of her career, but it was a fight she had been preparing for her entire life. Do you think Morgan made the right decision by making this incident public rather than handling it privately? Comment number 1 if you believe in public accountability, or number 2 if you think she should have managed this behind the scenes. And what about the board meeting tomorrow? Will they support her or try to push her out? Like and subscribe if you want to find out what happens next in this powerful story of standing up against systemic discrimination. The NextGen boardroom, with its gleaming mahogany table and panoramic views of the city skyline, had always been a place where Morgan felt in command. Today, as she took her seat at the head of the table, the atmosphere was decidedly different. Board members filed in silently, their usual pre-meeting small talk notably absent. Some avoided eye contact entirely, others offered tight, professional smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The division was palpable even before the first word was spoken. Harold Fishman called the emergency meeting to order precisely at 8 a.m. As the 71-year-old board chairman rapped his knuckles on the table, Morgan surveyed the faces around her. These 12 people, 8 men and for women, 9 white and 3 people of color, would decide whether her 15 years of building NextGen would continue or end today. "We all know why we're here," Harold began, his voice carefully neutral. "Yesterday's events have created significant challenges for our company. Before we discuss those challenges, I've asked CEO Alexander to address the board directly." Morgan stood, smoothing her charcoal gray suit. Unlike her power outfit from yesterday, today she had chosen something more subdued. This wasn't about intimidation but persuasion. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "Yesterday, I experienced firsthand what too many of our passengers have endured: discrimination, based solely on appearance. My response was not impulsive, but principled. It reflected the values this company was founded upon." She nodded to Tiana, who distributed tablets to each board member. "What you're receiving is a comprehensive report compiled overnight. It shows that in the past year alone, NextGen received 214 formal discrimination complaints. Of those, 197 were dismissed without substantive investigation, and 191 were filed by passengers of color." A murmur ran around the table as board members scrolled through the data. "This isn't about one incident or one employee," Morgan continued. "We have a systemic problem that has been allowed to fester. Under our watch, under my watch, I take full responsibility for not identifying this pattern sooner. But now that we know, we have an obligation to address it comprehensively and transparently." Marcus Reynolds, a 61-year-old venture capitalist who had been an early investor in NextGen, cleared his throat. His position on the board had always been tenuous. He appreciated the returns NextGen provided, but had frequently clashed with Morgan over her emphasis on corporate culture and diversity initiatives. "While these numbers are concerning," Marcus said, his voice measured, "the manner in which you chose to address this issue has created a significant crisis for our company. Stock is down 17% this morning. We've had cancellations from major corporate clients. The financial impact is already in the hundreds of millions." Several board members nodded in agreement. "The financial impact of unchecked discrimination is far greater," Morgan countered. "Every passenger who experiences bias and never returns. Every talented employee who leaves because they don't feel valued. Every contract we lose because our reputation doesn't match our stated values. Those costs don't show up neatly on a quarterly statement, but they're real." For the next 2 hours, the debate continued. The board divided into clear factions: those who supported Morgan's decisive action and those who believed she had acted rashly without considering the business implications. Victoria Chen, the 55-year-old CEO of a tech company and one of Morgan's strongest allies on the board, spoke forcefully in her defense. "What Morgan did took tremendous courage." Victoria said she could have easily handled this privately, fired one employee, issued a bland statement, and moved on. Instead, she chose to address the root cause. "That's not just moral leadership, it's business leadership. Long term, this will strengthen NextGen, not weaken it." Marcus shook his head. "With all due respect, Victoria, that's speculative. What we know for certain is that we're hemorrhaging money right now. Our fiduciary responsibility is to our shareholders. Our responsibility," Morgan interjected, "is to build a sustainable business that creates value for all stakeholders, including our employees and customers. A company culture that tolerates discrimination is fundamentally unsustainable." As the morning wore on, James Rodriguez presented a legal assessment of the situation, confirming that Morgan's actions had been within her authority as CEO under Emergency Protocol Alpha. Tiana provided additional data showing correlations between discrimination complaints and decreased customer retention in affected demographic groups. Round noon, the board took a brief recess. Morgan stepped into her office to find dozens of new messages waiting. One caught her eye: an email from Jasmine Patel, the flight attendant who had spoken up on Flight 187. Attached was a folder of documents. Ms. Alexander, Jasmine had written, after yesterday, several of us felt safe enough to share what we've been documenting. The attached files show a pattern of discrimination complaints being buried by specific managers. Some of us have been keeping records for years, afraid to come forward until now. Morgan opened the files and felt her blood run cold. The documents revealed an informal network within middle management that had systematically discredited, minimized, and dismissed discrimination complaints. More disturbing were several emails where managers openly mocked Morgan's diversity initiatives, referring to them as her pet projects and diversity obsession. When the board reconvened, Morgan had Tiana distribute these new documents. "This was just sent to me," Morgan explained. "It shows that the problem goes far beyond individual employees like Vanessa Whitley. We have an entrenched resistance to our stated values, operating within our own management structure." The room fell silent as board members reviewed the damning evidence. Even Marcus Reynolds appeared shaken by the explicit nature of some of the communications. Then, unexpectedly, Morgan's assistant entered the boardroom with an urgent message. Social media monitoring had picked up another trending hashtag, #NextGenLeaks. Current and former employees were publicly sharing their experiences of discrimination within the company and how their complaints had been ignored. The corporate resistance to change that had operated in shadows was now being exposed to sunlight from all directions. Marcus Reynolds was the first to break the silence. "This changes the calculation," he admitted reluctantly. "A few disgruntled employees we could manage, but this appears more widespread. It's not just a few employees," Morgan said quietly. "It's a cultural failing that we need to address head-on." Harold Fishman, who had remained largely neutral throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "I think we need to make a decision. The situation is escalating by the hour. Either we back Morgan's approach completely, or we need to consider a change." In leadership, the implication was clear. This was now a vote of confidence in Morgan's continued leadership of NextGen. Morgan stood again, her expression resolute. "Before you vote, I want to be absolutely clear about my position. I will not back down from addressing discrimination within NextGen, even if it means short-term financial pain. If the board cannot support that commitment, then I will tender my resignation effective immediately. The company I built will not tolerate discrimination on my watch, or it will no longer be under my watch." The ultimatum hung in the air. Morgan had just put 15 years of her life's work on the line for a principle. Harold called for a vote. One by one, board members voiced their positions. Victoria Chen and her allies strongly backed Morgan. Several members, who had initially seemed skeptical, now voted in support. Convinced by the new evidence, Marcus Reynolds and 2 others voted against. The final tally, 9-3 in favor of supporting Morgan's approach. Harold nodded, making the vote official. The board stands behind CEO Alexander and her plan to address discrimination within NextGen Airlines. Now, let's discuss specific next steps. As the meeting continued with a focus on concrete actions, Morgan felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The fight wasn't over, in many ways. It was just beginning, but she now had the explicit backing of her board to make the sweeping changes necessary. When the meeting finally adjourned late in the afternoon, Harold pulled Morgan aside. "That was a gutsy move," he said quietly. "Putting your job on the line like that." Morgan smiled slightly. "It wasn't a move, Harold. I meant every word. Some things are more important than a title or a corner office." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when I invested in AirConnect 15 years ago, everyone thought I was crazy to back a 27-year-old with more ambition than experience. Today reminded me why I made that bet." As Morgan returned to her office, she found Tiana waiting with updates on the public response. The hashtag stand with Morgan was now trending higher than any of the critical tags. Several major corporations had issued statements supporting NextGen's commitment to addressing discrimination. And most surprisingly, the stock had begun to recover, closing only 8% down after falling as much as 20% earlier in the day. The market's starting to see this as a positive long-term development, Tiana explained, "Investors appreciate decisive leadership and a genuine commitment to company values." Morgan nodded, allowing herself a moment of relief, but she knew the hardest work still lay ahead. Changing a culture wouldn't happen overnight or with a single dramatic confrontation. It would require sustained effort, difficult conversations, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. As she looked out her office window at the setting sun, Morgan Alexander made a silent promise to every NextGen employee and passenger who had ever experienced discrimination. This time would be different. This time, change would come. 6 weeks after the Flight to 187 incident, Morgan Alexander stood before 500 NextGen managers gathered in the company's training center. These were the people who would either enable or obstruct the transformation she had promised. Looking out at their faces, some eager, some skeptical, some openly resistant, she knew this speech would set the tone for everything that followed. For 15 years, Morgan began, "I've told anyone who would listen that NextGen Airlines was different, that we valued diversity not just in our marketing materials, but in our daily operations. Recent events have shown that I was wrong. Despite our stated values, we allowed a culture of discrimination to take root and flourish. That ends today." The silence in the room was absolute as Morgan outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented. First, an independent oversight committee for discrimination complaints, chaired by respected civil rights attorney Benjamin Torres, with direct reporting access to the board of directors. No complaint would ever again be buried by middle management. Second, mandatory sensitivity training for all 12,000 NextGen employees, starting with leadership. This wouldn't be the cursory online modules that many companies use to check a box. It would be intensive, in-person training focused on real-world scenarios. Third, a complete restructuring of the Human Resources Department, with several executives who had participated in suppressing complaints being asked to resign. Their replacements would be selected by a diverse committee based on demonstrated commitment to equity. Fourth, the promotion of employees who had previously been overlooked despite excellent performance, particularly those from underrepresented groups. Jasmine Patel, the flight attendant who had spoken up on Flight 2187, was being appointed to the newly created position of Head of Customer Experience. "These changes will not be easy," Morgan acknowledged. "Some of you may resist, some may leave, but make no mistake, this transformation is non-negotiable. NextGen will become a company where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, or it will no longer be the company I lead." The transformation began in earnest that day. As predicted, there was significant resistance. Several longtime executives resigned rather than adapt to the new direction. Others attempted to undermine the changes through passive resistance or malicious compliance. Morgan had anticipated this and had prepared accordingly. The Oversight Committee was given authority to bypass traditional management channels. When necessary, progress metrics were established with clear accountability. And perhaps most importantly, Morgan herself remained deeply involved, regularly flying undercover to experience the customer experience firsthand. Initial results were mixed. Customer satisfaction scores dropped during the first month as the company worked through its growing pains. Social media remained divided, with some praising NextGen's transparency while others criticized the company for being too woke or virtue signaling. Bradley Cooper, who had been hesitant to speak up against Vanessa Whitley during the original incident, found his voice as part of the transformation. He became a powerful advocate within the flight attendant corps, helping colleagues understand the importance of the changes and providing feedback to management. About ongoing challenges, "I stayed silent for too long," he told a group of new hires during their orientation. "I was part of the problem because I saw discrimination and did nothing. Don't make the same mistake I did. Speak up, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." By the 3-month mark, tangible changes were visible throughout the organization. Complaint resolution times had decreased by 67%. Employee satisfaction scores were rising, particularly among minority staff, and customer feedback was beginning to reflect a more consistent experience regardless of race, gender, or appearance. perhaps the most surprising development, came from an unexpected quarter. Vanessa Whitley, after completing a comprehensive sensitivity training program and undergoing counseling, wrote a lengthy apology to Morgan. "I never thought of myself as racist," she wrote. "I told myself I was just following procedures, being vigilant about security. The training helped me see the biases I didn't know I carried. I'm not asking for my job back. I understand the consequences of my actions. But I wanted you to know that what happened that day has changed me, and I'm grateful for the difficult lessons I've learned." Morgan shared the letter with her executive team, sparking a complex discussion about redemption and second chances. After much deliberation, they created a pathway for former employees like Vanessa to eventually return to NextGen in different roles, provided they completed extensive training and demonstrated genuine change. Transformation isn't just about punishment, Morgan explained to skeptical board members. It's about creating opportunities for growth and redemption. If we truly believe people can change, we need to create structures that allow for that change. Industry publications began featuring NextGen as a case study in crisis management and cultural transformation. Harvard Business School developed a curriculum module based on the Flight 2187 incident and its aftermath. Competitors scrambled to implement similar policies, recognizing that NextGen was setting a new standard for the industry. By the 6-month mark, NextGen's stock had not only recovered, but reached an all-time high. Analysis attributed this to increased customer loyalty, particularly among minority travelers who now specifically chose NextGen for its demonstrated commitment to equity. Morgan received numerous awards and speaking invitations, but she declined, most of them preferring to focus on the ongoing work within her company. When she did speak publicly, she was careful to emphasize that the transformation was still in progress. "We haven't solved racism or discrimination," she told a graduating class at her alma mater. "What we've done is create systems of accountability and transparency that make it harder for bias to go unchecked. The work continues every day. With every interaction, with every decision, it's never finished." On the anniversary of the Flight 2187 incident, NextGen held a company-wide day of reflection and recommitment. Employees shared stories of both progress and ongoing challenges. Morgan announced the establishment of the NextGen Foundation, which would provide scholarships and mentoring for minorities interested in aviation careers. Perhaps the most meaningful measure of transformation came in the form of data. In the year following the incident, NextGen saw a 73% decrease in discrimination complaints. More importantly, when complaints were filed, 98% received thorough investigation and appropriate resolution. As Morgan reflected on the year of transformation, she recognized that the journey was far from complete. Changing a corporate culture was like turning an ocean liner. It happened gradually, with constant adjustment and vigilance, but NextGen was undeniably moving in the right direction, becoming the company she had always envisioned. The transformation had cost her countless hours, emotional energy, and more than a few sleepless nights. But sitting in her office, reviewing the progress reports, Morgan Alexander knew it had been worth every sacrifice. Her company was finally beginning to truly reflect its values, not just in words, but in actions, and that was a legacy worth building. Exactly 1 year after the Flight 2187 incident, Morgan Alexander stood in line at Gate C-42 at Atlanta International Airport. Once again, she was dressed casually, jeans, a simple blouse, and a patterned headscarf concealing her recognizable braids. Once again, she carried a standard economy ticket, but this time, everything else was different. As Morgan approached the gate agent, a young Latino woman named Carmen, she was greeted with a warm smile. "Good morning. How are you today?" "I'm well, thank you," Morgan replied, presenting her boarding pass. Carmen scanned the pass efficiently, maintaining eye contact and the same friendly demeanor she had shown to every passenger. Before Morgan, "You're all set for seat 14A. Have a great flight." No extra scrutiny, no questions about whether she was in the right line. Just professional, respectful service, exactly what every passenger deserved. As Morgan walked down the jetway, she felt a complex emotion that took her a moment to identify: pride mixed with a touch of sadness, that such basic dignity should feel like a victory. The flight attendant at the aircraft door, an older black man named Robert, welcomed her aboard with the same courtesy he extended to every passenger. As Morgan made her way to her seat, she observed the crew interacting with the diverse passengers. The elderly Asian couple in one OB and C receiving assistance with their bags. The young Muslim woman in a hijab being offered a beverage with the same smile. As her white seatmate, the black family in row 15 engaged in friendly conversation with a flight attendant about their destination. Small interactions, normal courtesies, the kind that most white passengers had always taken for granted. As Morgan settled into her window seat, a woman in her 60s sat down beside her in 1B. There was something vaguely familiar about her, but Morgan couldn't quite place her. "I thought it was you," the woman said quietly after a moment. "You're Morgan Alexander, aren't you?" Even with the headscarf, "I recognized you." Morgan smiled slightly. "Yes, I am. And you are?" "Patricia Collins. I was on flight to 187 a year ago. I was in row 22. The recognition clicked. Patricia had been one of the passengers who had spoken up during the confrontation, sharing her own experiences with discrimination on previous flights. "I remember you," Morgan said warmly. "You were very brave that day." Patricia shook her head. "Not nearly as brave as you. I've wanted to thank you ever since. That day, it changed something for me. I've been flying for 40 years, and I just accepted that being treated differently was part of the experience for people who look like us. After watching you stand your ground, I stopped accepting it." As the flight took off, Patricia shared how the incident had affected her life beyond air travel. She had returned to her job as a high school principal and implemented similar accountability systems for addressing bias in her school. She had spoken at community meetings about the importance of not just identifying discrimination, but actively working to dismantle it. "Your actions that day created ripples," Patricia concluded, far beyond NextGen Airlines. Morgan was deeply moved by Patricia's words. Throughout the transformation process, she had focused primarily on the metrics, complaint numbers, resolution rates, employee retention. Hearing about the human impact beyond those statistics was profoundly affirming. The year had brought personal changes for Morgan as well. The very public stand she had taken had unexpectedly healed a rift with her parents that had existed since she chose business over the teaching career they had envisioned for her. "I never fully understood your drive before," her father had told her after watching her television interview following the incident. "Now I see you were teaching all along, just on a much bigger scale." The most significant personal change had been Morgan's decision to finally start a family. After years of putting her personal life on hold for her career, the flight to 187 incident had clarified her priorities. At 43, she had begun the process of adopting as a single mother, welcoming 5-year-old Zara into her life 3 months ago. Becoming a mother had given the transformation an even deeper meaning. Every policy change, every difficult conversation, every system of accountability was helping to build a world where Zara might be treated with dignity regardless of the color of her skin. As Flight 2187, now a route number that carried special significance for everyone at NextGen, approached Chicago, Morgan observed another flight attendant interacting with a young black woman. Several rows ahead, the passenger appeared to be a college student, possibly flying alone for the first time. The flight attendant, a white woman in her 40s, was explaining something about connecting flights with patience and respect. No one else on the plane would have found this interaction noteworthy, but Morgan knew how different it might have been a year ago. The transformation wasn't just about preventing negative experiences. It was about ensuring that positive, respectful interactions became so normal that they weren't even remarkable. After landing, Morgan thanked Patricia for sharing her story and made her way to the terminal for her connecting flight. At the gate, she noticed a wall display that hadn't been there during her last visit. NextGen Values in Action. The installation featured photographs and stories of employees who had gone above and beyond to ensure dignity and respect for all passengers. Several of the featured employees had been instrumental in the transformation. Bradley Cooper was there, now a senior trainer helping new flight attendants understand the importance of equitable treatment. Jasmine Patel appeared as the head of customer experience, implementing systems to ensure consistent service quality. And surprisingly, in the section labeled Journeys of Growth was Vanessa Whitley. The accompanying text explained that after completing extensive training and demonstrating genuine change, she had been rehired as part of NextGen's community outreach team, where she now helped educate other companies about the importance of addressing unconscious bias. Morgan studied Vanessa's photo, remembering the angry, defensive woman who had removed her from a flight a year ago. Her controversial decision to offer former employees like Vanessa a path back to the company had been met with skepticism from many quarters. Yet the data showed that some of the most committed advocates for the transformation were those who had experienced their own journey of recognition and growth. As Morgan continued to her gate, she overheard two NextGen pilots discussing a recent incident where a captain had intervened when a passenger made racist comments to a flight attendant. The company's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination now extended to passenger behavior as well, empowering crew members to stand up against bias from any source. Small changes, significant results, a company culture slowly but fundamentally transformed. That evening, as Morgan finally returned home to her daughter and the nanny who had cared for her during this quick business trip, she reflected on the anniversary of Flight 2187. The incident had been painful, humiliating, and costly, both personally and professionally. Yet it had catalyzed changes that might never have happened otherwise. As she tucked Zara into bed, the little girl asked for her favorite story, the one about the airline CEO who grounded a flight to stand up against unfairness. And did it work, Mama? Zara asked, though she knew the answer by heart. Morgan smiled, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. It's still working, baby girl. Change takes time, but every day it gets a little better. After Zara fell asleep, Morgan sat in her home office, reviewing preparations for tomorrow's announcement, the expansion of the NextGen Foundation's scholarship program, and the launch of a new industry-wide initiative to address discrimination in air travel. On her desk sat a framed note she had received from a young flight attendant last week. Thank you for making NextGen a place where I can bring my whole self to work without fear. That, more than any stock price or industry award, was the measure of success that mattered most to Morgan Alexander. The flight that had been grounded a year ago had eventually taken off, not just literally, but as a symbol of what was possible when courage, accountability, and commitment aligned. The journey continued, with turbulence still encountered at times, but the destination was clearer than ever: a company, and perhaps someday an industry, where dignity and respect were not aspirational values, but lived realities. For Morgan, that was a journey worth every sacrifice. This powerful story reminds us that real change requires more than just words on paper or policies in handbooks. Morgan Alexander's journey shows that addressing discrimination demands courage to confront uncomfortable truths, even when it costs us personally. True leadership means taking accountability for systemic problems, rather than just addressing isolated incidents. The transformation at NextGen Airlines teaches us that meaningful change happens when we create systems of transparency and accountability. It's not enough to simply declare values. We must build mechanisms that enforce them consistently. When discrimination is allowed to persist, it's often because those with power choose comfort over confrontation. Perhaps most importantly, the story demonstrates that one person's stand against injustice can create ripples far beyond the initial incident. Morgan's decision to ground that flight didn't just change her airline, it changed perspectives, inspired others to speak up, and ultimately contributed to a more equitable culture. Changing entrenched systems isn't easy or quick. It requires persistence, patience, and the willingness to face resistance. But as Morgan discovered, the journey toward justice is always worth the sacrifice. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like what Morgan experienced? Would you speak up like Bradley eventually did? Or would you stay silent? Have you ever had to take a stand against injustice, even when it was difficult? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story inspired you to reflect on how we can all create positive change, Please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for joining me for this powerful journey of standing against racism. And remember, sometimes the most important flights are the ones we ground, not the ones we take.